got really quiet. I guess we're starting. The words are, Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Light is sown for the righteous. Ul Yishrei Lev Simcha. And joy for the upright. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Or Zarua. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev. Uleishrei Lev Simcha. I think we're ready to bring in Shabbat with Shalom Alechem, page 142. That's the wrong key. Let's get into it. Here we go. Shalom Alechem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. Yilelech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leShalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. V'melech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Archoni leShalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. V'melech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeitkhem leShalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. V'melech Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Wonderful to be together. We had a delicious Shabbat dinner with our Next Gen group earlier, and there's something about this time of year. As you might know, just today, before we began Shabbat, was Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of this month of Kislev, which is our month of Hanukkah, and we start to think a lot about light, bringing in light into darkness to make that really incredible contribution that light can bring to a space that's dark and totally transform and change things. And so we get to do that every week when we light our Shabbat candles. And this week I'm very happy to invite Daryl and Leanna to come join us, our newlyweds who were just married 2 weeks ago. And if you would, Leanna and Daryl, you can lead us from the middle podium with the reading before the lighting of the Shabbat candles.
Ready? As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Go ahead.
Not singing or no, just like
We light them and then we say the blessing. We'll do it together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. So last weekend, I had the honor of getting to celebrate with my friend Cantor Leanna Mendelsohn at her congregation, where she was installed, just like I was a few weeks ago. She is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So it really feels like it's been a journey since the last time I was here for services 2 weeks ago. But I wanted to share this poem by Rabbi Karen Kedar about the transition into Shabbat, the power of light that we just talked about with this month of Kislev, and just cultivating some presence of mind, bringing us to this moment. It's called Open My Eyes. To gaze and to linger, to cultivate the practice of pause. This is the revolution, to liberate the light from the dull and routine way we walk through this life. We'll start Kabbalat Shabbat, page 130, with Lechu Neranena. Lechu Neranena l'Adonai, Nariya, Letzor Yisheinu. Lechu Neranena l'Adonai, Nariya, Letzor Yisheinu. Lechu Neranena l'Adonai, Nariya, Letzor Yisheinu. Nekadma Betoda, Bizmirot Nariya lo, Nekadma Fanav, Betoda, Bizmirot Nariya lo. Yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai 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 lai 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 lai, yai lai lai lai. Shiru l'Adonai on the next page. Shiru l'Adonai, shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruchu shemo, basru miyom leyom yeshuato, sapru bagoyim kevodo bechol ha'amim nikleotav, ki gadol Adonai u'olam ve'od, no ra'u al kol 33, Mizmor Shiru. Mizmor Shiru l'Adonai, Shir Chadash, Ki Niflaot Asa, Hoshia lo Yamino Zroa, Kodsho Dia, Adonai Yeshuato, Le'nei Hagoyim Gilad Simchato, Zachar Chasto ve'emunato, Lebeit Yisrael, Ra'u chol afsei haaretz, et Yeshuat Eloheinu, Hariu l'Adonai kol haaretz, Nitzchu ve'ranenu ve'zameru, Yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, Yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, Yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, Yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, Yalai, lai, yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, Yalai, lai, 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 Yalai, lai, 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 yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, 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 lai. We're going to turn now to Lechadodi, the peak of this Kabbalat Shabbat, part of our service. You sound amazing. I love the spirit that we're bringing into this space right now, so let's bring it to Lechadodi, welcoming in the Sabbath bride. Oh, Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekavela, Lechadodi likrat kala, B'nei Shabbat nekavela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ולתפארת ולתהילה. כל אחד דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. כל אחד דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. Verse 2. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה. מראש מכרם מזוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. הולך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. הולך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. Verse 3. מקדש מלך עיר מלוכה, קומי צאי מתוך ההפכה. רב לך שבט בעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלייך אלה. הולך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. הולך דודי
face the back to welcome the Sabbath bride.
Boi v'shalom, ateret bala, gam besimcha uvetzola, toch emunei am segula, boi chala, boi chala, olecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei shama nekabela, olecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela.
May be seated.
So we had one addition. Traditionally, we do 2 psalms after Lecha Dodi to kind of breathe again after all that excitement. So on the bottom of page 140, kind of that second paragraph, we have these beautiful words of Tzadik Katamar from Psalm 92. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach Keres Balvanon Yizke Shetuli Beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yavrichu Onyenu Von Beseva Desheni Veranani Yiu Lehagi Ki Hashar Adonai Suri Belo Avlatabo.
These sound very good tonight. So as we turn ahead now to page 263, as we transition into our Ma'ariv, our evening service, I'll invite everyone to please rise Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש מרבה, נלמד יברכרותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו, אמן. יהי שמרה במבורך, לעולם יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשא בריחו לעילם עם כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ולחמתה תמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
Baruch Adonai המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
Be seated. Page 265, our prayer for evening. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim. בחוכמה פותח שערים, ובתבונה משנה עתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו. בורא יום ולילה, גולל אור מפני חושך, וחושך מפני אור. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו.
אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אתה, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך, לעולם לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגד יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברתך בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, ובשלתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בעיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם, amen.
So in this entry into Kislev, we're, as we always do with Mi Chamocha, it's time to change our tune. And, well, you'll know what it is, I'm sure. Page 270.
Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, noran leilot osef ele malchutecha ra'u vanecha bokei yam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam zelianu ve'ameru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Page 271.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו ושומרנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל, ועל ירושלים.
As we join together in Vishamru, we think about what it is that pulls us together every Shabbat. It's lots of different reasons, of course, that we come to shul, but more than that, just being in Shabbat. It really is a connection among the Jewish people around the world to know that we're just all pausing and taking this time to be together, to be in this Zman Kodesh, this time of real sanctity, and what a gift it is. So let's join together in Vishamru, page 272.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. ים ברי די די, שבת שבת, ים ברי די די, שבת שבת, ים ברי די די, שבת 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 שלום. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. ים ברי די די, שבת שבת, ים ברי די די, שבת שבת, ים ברי די די, Shabbat, 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 Shalom.
We'll rise together now for the Amidah, beginning on page 274.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ואלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה מתים אתה והושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיה מתים ברחמים רבים. צומח נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך על גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיה המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh.
Amen.
You may be seated. We continue on page 279, Ritzeh.
Ritzeh Adonai Eloheinu ve'amecha Yisrael u'tefilatam be'ahava tekabel u'tehilei ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael Yisrael Amecha El Karov Lechol Korav Penei El Avadecha Vechoneinu Shefoch Rochacha Aleinu V'techezena Eineinu B'shuvech leTzion berachamim Baruch atah Adonai המחזיר שכינתו לציון, לציון.
Keep getting asked this week if I was going to do anything for American Thanksgiving. And I feel like now I live in the netherworld of not really doing American Thanksgiving anymore, but I still haven't really adapted Canadian Thanksgiving, and I don't know what to do about that. But it is always Thanksgiving. I mean, if we think about it, there should always be these moments of gratitude. We can't always dedicate, this craziness of a big, huge meal, though we do that for Shabbat and holidays all the time. But the essence of what we think about in Thanksgiving is gratitude and taking time to just pause and reflect and to count our blessings. And indeed, we should do that every moment that we can. And so we will, as we turn to page 281, in the middle of this prayer of Hoda'ah, Ve'al kulam yitbarach, for all of these things we give praise.
ועל כולם, ועל כולם, יתברך ויתרומם, יתברך ויתרומם, שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד, וכל החיים יודו חסלה, ויהללו את שמך באמת, האל ישועתנו ועזרתנו, עזרתנו סלע. ועל כולם, ועל כולם, יתברך ויתרומם, יתברך ויתרומם, שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, הטוב שמך, הטוב שמך, ולך נאה להודות.
Our prayer for peace, Shalom Rav, page 282.
שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. כי אתה מלך אדון לכל השלום. לכל השלום, שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשיא לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשיא לעולם. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל, בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם.
Take a few moments now for our own silent prayer.
אור זרוע לצדיק, אור זרוע לצדיק, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב שמחה. אור זרוע, אור זרוע לצדיק, אור זרוע לצדיק, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב שמחה. From the top. אור זרוע לצדיק, אור זרוע, אור זרוע לצדיק, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב שמחה. אור זרוע לצדיק, אור זרוע לצדיק, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב שמחה. One more time, you got it. אור זרוע לצדיק, אור זרוע לצדיק, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב, ולישרי לב שמחה.
Invite everyone to turn to page 371. We might pause to offer a blessing of healing for those in our hearts, our loved ones, family, and friends who are struggling with health. In particular, we think the Shabbat of Rebecca Daum, Hannah Batsara Shmuel, Meir Zalman ben Rachel, Mark Rosen, Dr. Anaitia Ariana, Daniel Gottesman, Bill Shaw, Vivian Garfinkel, Sarah Chiachi, Andrew Jason Bruce, Lawrence Down, Claire Columbia, Jack Karp, Dan Badash, Victor Lewin, Yaniv Kadar, Fran Goldberg, Doreen Irving, Matt Good, Alicia Eckersley, Tsipa Bat-Ita, Han Bild, Leto and Jay, Alan Pitch, Asher Gavriel, Ben Mordechai Yoshuv, Asara Elishev, David Coulter, Apollonia Wilczynski, Elena Cobb, Annette Albert, Carla Zivit, Doris Medved, Janet Gelb, Jean Angus, Judy Steiner Losberg, David Shlomo Gorney, and Andrea Jarzbiak. But if there are other names, people you're thinking of, if you'd like to share them at this time. Join together the middle of 371.
Bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. It's so great to see everyone and hear our voices coming together. I just want to share a few announcements before I introduce our guest for this evening. Lots happening in the next few weeks, including tomorrow night is our Sisterhood's fall fundraiser. It's a talent show. It sounds really great. Temple's Got Talent, and indeed we do. I know there's some of the talent is here tonight. So if you haven't already RSVP'd, it's not too late. Please join us. Also, this coming week, November 30th, on Wednesday, our very own Chris Friedrichs is going to be giving a lecture for the Men's Club on Berlin, the history of the city of Berlin for Germans and Jews. So that will be at 7 o'clock, and that's in person here. So the Men's Club has really shifted to in-person programming, which is very exciting. A couple other things happening. Coming up, we have our really interesting presentation, a book discussion with David Bernstein on his book, Woke Anti-Semitism. That will be on Thursday, December 1st at 7:30. And also the following Thursday, very excited to have Rabbi Bregman, who's with us tonight, Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Bregman, in his work with his group, The Other People, will be coming together, a really wonderful group that Rabbi Bregman's been working with and who traveled together to Israel and Dubai just recently. So that will be the following week, Thursday the 8th at 8 o'clock. Please come for that, really working to overcome racism and biases and things in our society. Finally, just a couple Hanukkah-related announcements. Next Shabbat, so Friday, December 2nd, our first Shabbat of the month is always for our young families. It will be kind of a pre-Hanukkah themed, getting ready for Hanukkah Shabbat dinner, and we do need RSVPs for that. And then on December 13th, our Shalom Shishim, our seniors group, will be gathering for a Hanukkah-themed lunch with both Cantor Cohen and Erin Aberly-Palm, who's here, and a new mom. So exciting. So that will be great for a Hanukkah lunch. Did I miss anything? No? Okay. Well, we are so lucky to have a wonderful scholar with us this Shabbat, Dr. Michal Barasher-Siegel, who is a scholar of Rabbinic Judaism and of Talmud in particular. She is a professor at the Ben Gurion University in the Negev, and this academic year she is a visiting professor at Yale. And so we were very fortunate when Michal and also Elitzur, who is here also a professor at Hebrew University and at Yale this year, decided they should come to Vancouver. And with the help of, I should say, the Diamond Chair in Jewish Law and Ethics, who's my husband, to come to UBC. It was such an amazing opportunity to say, wouldn't it be wonderful to have Michal as our scholar in residence this Shabbat? So special thank you to the Diamond Chair. And really, we are fortunate. Michal is really one of the great scholars of her generation, not only for her scholarship, but for her leadership in really working to diversify the field of Jewish studies and Talmud in Israel and really all around the world. And so we're very lucky to have you, and to have you as a friend and with your whole family, with your 3 boys here. So welcome to Temple Sholom. And thank you. Michal will be speaking tonight, of course, and then tomorrow. I know you'll want to come back and hear her speak at Shabbat lunch. So, Michal.
Thank you. Taller speakers. Yeah. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and what a wonderful prayer and such a great hospitality of this wonderful community. So I am a scholar of Rabbinic Judaism, and I teach at Ben Gurion University in the south of Israel. But what I do in my research is I look at Jews and Christians in the first century CE, and I try to talk about the way those two religions developed side by side. And the text that I use to do that is the Babylonian Talmud. So that's what I do in my research. And tomorrow I'll give you an example of what kind of text I look at and how do I ask the question about those two religions growing side by side in those first century CE. But from all of the parashot to come and talk about Jews and Christians, this is the parasha to do so, which really was just goes to shows how hashgacha, right? We have the presence that really directed us to come and visit Vancouver on this Shabbat, is because in this parasha, Rivka is pregnant with twins. I have a close affinity to that because I have twins of my own, so I know the feeling when she says she feels them moving in her belly. I know the feeling well, and so she's pregnant with twins after we're told she had problems getting to be pregnant, and then she goes and she asks, and she's told she has 2 nations in her belly, Shnei Goyim bibitnech, obviously Jacob and Esau. And that notion of those 2 nations in her belly, which will develop to be Israel and Esau, or then Edom, is seen as an important moment in the history of those two nations. And we are reading tomorrow. We'll read the actual portion of the Torah that talks about the birth of those 2 nations. Now, there's every story has the story and how the way it was told, and also the reception of it, right? What people did with that story once it came to be. Now, the stories, those 2 nations in Rivka's belly, became a very important one, especially when we're talking about Jews and Christians. because those two nations, Esav and Yaakov, became symbols, or they were seen as myth to talk about Judaism and Christianity. It didn't begin this way. We have to talk about stages in the development of the story. So when we actually look, when scholars looked at the story that we're reading in this parasha, in Toldot, the story has actually two vibes to it. The general story, when we talk about Esav and Yaakov and how they got along, there's one part of the story that's very mild, right? We don't see a lot of hatred or discordance between them. And then there's parts of the story that it becomes very apparent that there's a problem there that's happening between the two of them. So scholars actually think that some of those portions were actually inserted later on when that animosity became between those two nations, which is interesting in itself, right? So maybe the story could have gone in a different direction, but by the time it's told, we already know the ending of it, right? So for example, when we have at one point of the story, it says that Esav takes two women from the Hittite women, and then we have the whole story where Esav and Yaakov prepare the food, right, for when Yaakov prepared the food for his father, right, and he thinks that it's him, and he takes the blessing of his brother, and then at the end of it, when he decides to flee and go and with his mother and go away, then all of a sudden she turns to her husband and she says, "I'm not happy with this Hittite woman, and I wanted to have a different wife." So scholars tend to think that that might have been the story originally was just about looking for a different woman and had nothing to do, and all the rest is just an extra put in the middle. So we have those different traditions about, did really Jacob and Esau did not get along so well, or that we have different traditions about that. But we know the ending, right? So when the story is already being told, Esav is considered the forefather, right? The establishment of the Edomites, right? The nation of Edom, and we have the Haftarah for this week actually already says that God loves Yaakov and doesn't like Esav, and that's the reason that it's connected to this week's parasha. So we already have, during the later period in the biblical time, that this is seen as animosity between those two nations. What's interesting to me, and this is where we get to the fun part, is when we get to the rabbinic literature, the Edomites are no longer an issue, and the Edomites are perceived as a way to talk about another great nation that's an enemy, which is Rome. So Edom is a nickname for Rome. So we have a lot of passages in rabbinic literature that every time they see the word Edom or uses it, or Esav, talk about, in fact, the myth of the biblical myth of those two nations and the warring and the animosity between them, to talk about contemporary history of the rabbinic period, which is the Roman Empire, and it's more powerful, dangerous, in contrast with the Jewish people telling the story. And beginning of the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire becomes Christian, so Edom becomes later on Christian. And then when we're talking about, and we use the beautiful melody of Maoz Tzur tonight for some of the songs that we were singing, the last verse of Maoz Tzur actually uses the word Edom to talk about Christianity. So Edom becomes Christianity to talk about Christianity. So we go from Esav, the biblical Esav, through Edom, through Rome, through Christianity. So this is used really through the centuries and through history, as the myth is used to talk about contemporary problems that occupies the writers of the different passages. And what's interesting about this, and when we look at rabbinic literature, they take the stories of Esav and Yaakov and they make them worse, right? So in some part of the story, for example, when Esav sees his brothers after a long time, he comes back, Yaakov comes back, and he hasn't seen his brothers for a really long time, and they hug, right? Again, mothers of twins. It's very heartbreaking to read the stories, and you see them meeting after they haven't seen each other for a really long time, and the Bible tells us that Esav actually falls on his brother's neck and hugs him, right? It's a really moving scene. So the rabbis say he tried to bite him in his neck. But there was a miracle that happened, and his neck became so solid that he couldn't bite him. But look really, it takes a very, very moving scene that the Bible gives as it is. The Bible is, at this point, the way the final story is being composed, there is a complexity there, right? And by the way, the Bible is very careful not to present any side to be completely pure, right? Jacob is very, deviant. He does stuff Jacob is very savvy. And Esav does his own thing, right? So no one comes in too nice, right? They're both like, he even the part where he comes in and he sells his bechorah. How do you say bechorah? Birthright. He sells it for food, right? So the Bible is critical on both sides, right? Why are you selling it so cheaply? On the other hand, why are you trying to buy it so cheaply, right? So the Bible is very complex. No one is completely pure. But when the rabbis get their hands on the story and they read it, so the Bible still gives that moment of the meeting between the two brothers, which is scary, and Jacob doesn't know how it's going to happen, and he gets ready for it. And then the moment of the meeting, when the Bible still tells us they met and they hugged and he cried and he fell on his neck, the rabbis turn it and make it, no, that was he tried to bite him like a vampire or something, right? And it didn't work. The imagination that they had. But we have to understand that the rabbis are using the biblical myth to talk on their own time, right? So the moment that Esav is no longer Esav, but he represents the what became later of Esav, the forefather of the Romans, and then the Christianity that they're facing in their time, right, in the 4th and 5th century, they can't imagine a scene where they're actually hugging after everything they went through, right? So it cannot be that they're actually, there's something, we have to understand what's happening here. It cannot be that they're actually happy to see each other or glad, right? So, and I want to finish by talking about the use of metaphor, or the way we use language to talk about metaphors, and especially when it comes to the relationship between Jews and Christian. What do we do when we use a certain language to talk about relationship between people, or relationship between religion, or relationship between communities? So I called the talk tonight, Two Nations in Your Belly, and this is actually taken from a book by a professor called Israel Yuval, who wrote a book about Esav and Yaakov. And he said that he chose this in the introduction to the book. He said, I chose this verse because she's uncomfortable. Rivka in the verses is very uncomfortable with twins. Again, anyone who was pregnant with twins know how horrible it is. I keep telling my kids, you were the one who kicked me in the butt, and you're the one who kicked me up here, and I know which one is which. And right, so it's very uncomfortable, and you're moving around, and she goes and she asks, and she's told that she has two nations in her belly. But when the rabbis get their hand on this part of the story, they elaborate more. And they say, what does it mean she was uncomfortable? It's not just about sitting on a chair, which is uncomfortable. It's more than that, they say. When she used to go next to a place of worship, of pagan worship, her belly would move frantically. When she would go next to a synagogue, her belly would move frantically. So she didn't know what was happening. What? Is her baby a good baby or a bad baby, right? She didn't know what was happening. And then they told her, you have twins, right? By the way, my father is also a twin, and my grandmother knew, that was before ultrasound, she knew she had twins because they would kick differently in her belly. That's how she explained it to me, right? She knew that, right? So she could feel that there was something happening, and they said to her, you have two different nations in your belly. You have two different inclinations. You have two different, one that wants the synagogue and one that wants. Think of what it means, right? When the rabbis take the story of the uncomfortableness of the pregnancy, and they make it into something else. They say, right, it's the two different nations, the two different. So Israel Yuval said when he chose the name for his book to talk about Esau and Jacob, he chose that verse because he wanted to talk about the animosity and the way people talk about it, but also the fact that they both came from the same belly, right? They originated from the same mother. There was a time when they were both in their mother's belly. And so when the metaphor that's used two nations in your belly is that it's two nations in one belly, right? So how we talk about this and how the rabbis have to deal with the fact that the verses still preserve a complex situation of polemics and interaction between them, but still the moment of, falling on each other's neck, right? And how do you deal with the complex relationship, and what's the metaphors that you use? So that's one metaphor, right? Two bellies in your belly, two nations in your belly, and this is Israel Yuval's metaphor that he used. But when we're talking about Jews and Christians, and this has a little to do with, I'm giving you a preview and hopefully getting you interested in my talk tomorrow. When we're talking about Jews and Christians in the first century CE, we've been experiencing a change in the metaphor and the way we talk about it even in research. So when we talked about Judaism and Christianity, there's a few metaphors to talk about the relationship between the two. So we used to talk, for example, about a mother and a daughter, right? A mother religion, Judaism, and its daughter, Christianity, that came from it. But then slowly, by the way, that's a very Christian way of talking about it, because it means that the daughter is better than the mother, right? Because it's right. So we don't like that so much. Also, it's not very accurate also, because it kind of suggests that Judaism came before Christianity, which is true, but what kind of Judaism? It's actually biblical Judaism. And when we're talking about rabbinic Judaism, in fact, rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity developed at the same time, in the first century CEs. So it's not really a mother and a son and daughter, but more two nations in one belly, right? It's more accurate to describe it as such. Okay, so that's better. But then scholars started to talk about the ways that parted, right? That was another metaphor used, right? How do you describe something? Look how important words are. What do you do with the words to describe relationship between group? How do you use words to convey meaning? And what do you do with those meanings when you choose a metaphor? So choosing the metaphor is important, right? Because it says something about your theology, about what you think about the other group. So when scholarship started talking about the ways that parted, they said, okay, so there was one way, let's say Judaism of the Bible, right? The biblical Judaism. And then at some point, there was a parting of the ways, the more being departed, into rabbinic Judaism and to early Christianity. So that was and then people started asking, wait, when did the ways parted? So somewhere around the beginning of the second century, end of the second century, Jesus' time, or a little bit after Jesus' time, or his students. But what happened is, and that was a metaphor that was used in research for a few years, but then scholarship started realizing that the scholarship doesn't work so well with that, because we started seeing that metaphor assumes first that there was one way in Second Temple Judaism, and then at some point it parted. For first, there was no one way. Everything we know about Second Temple Judaism, and here I refer you to the very sacred source of the Life of Brian of Monty Python to show you how there's a lot we can say about Second Temple Judaism, but being one Judaism is really the farthest thing we can say. There were many, many Judaisms and many, many different groups and many, many ways to be Jewish, so there wasn't one way from which to separate it. So that was a problem. And then when people started saying, okay, so let's assume there was some kind of a way, and at some point it split. But was there like one event that split? Everything we see from the sources actually suggests that, there were Christian communities that kept circumcising and keeping kosher very, very late on. We have Chrysostomus in the 4th century yelling at his congregation to stop fasting on Yom Kippur. And we have, so we see that things on the ground are much more messy and complicated than one event that allowed the split. And more than that, the metaphor of splitting of the ways suggests that there was such a thing as Judaism on one hand and Christianity on the other, and very defined. And again, everything we know about the history shows us it doesn't work this way. Judaism was very, very messy and complex, and as we know here as well, right? What does it mean to be Jewish, right? It's not one way. And what does it mean to be Christian? Believe me, the mess on the other side. We're very, very united and organized compared to what's happening on the Christian side. So that metaphor doesn't work either. So what do we do? So what's the right metaphor to describe Judaism and Christianity. So much so that we now have scholars talking about the ways that never parted, right? Or the ways that kept parting, or so, right? So how do we describe Judaism and Christianity? What metaphors do we use? I don't have an answer to that. But it's interesting that we've now reached a stage where we really think about the metaphors that we use in order to do that. And it didn't start with us, right? It started with the biblical verses, and we'll really see during the time of the creation of the biblical myth how they struggled with what to do with those characters and how to build them and how to construct this relationship with them, knowing that they'll become nations. Already, who's ever telling the story knows that, and how to describe the relationship knowing that, right? How to use that as a metaphor for what's happening later. And as history continues, how to describe this relationship between those two religions. And tomorrow, we'll see an example how the rabbis deal with that in more details. But I think if I'll use this last minute to just talk about the importance of metaphor and the language we use and what it conveys and how important it is, especially when we're talking about history and history building contemporaneous history and contemporary history, how important words are and the metaphor we use to convey and create actual reality. So how careful we need to do when we do that, and to think of what metaphors and what they do in the world we live in. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Michal. We're looking forward to learning more tomorrow. At Shabbat dinner tonight, her twin said, which heretic are you going to talk about tomorrow, Mom? She said, and you guys said it's the best story, right? So, okay, good. Excited. So we're going to turn now to Aleinu as we conclude our service on page 586. Please rise.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, ידעת היום בהשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת. In the middle of page 590. Ki ha-malchut shelcha hi, ule'oleah limloch v'chavod, ka'katuv b'toratecha, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed.
Please be seated. A reading before Kaddish on page 594. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. As we prepare to recite Kaddish on page 598, we share the names of those whom we are remembering
Sharing some words tomorrow.
in our congregation. And I invite you, as I read the name of your loved one, to please stand as you honor their memory. We are in Shloshim for Shelley Superstein Alexander, Daron Cohen, and Dr. Manny Matus. And we mark yahrzeit this week of Andrew Anthony, Rosalie Bakalinski, Selma Bregman, Michael Breslau, Rivka Brazer, Joseph Brook, Elka Chernikin, Lori Feldman, Lila Helen Flanders, David Fox, Priscilla Fratkin, Charles Albert Fugman, Joseph Gelfand, Sonia Givantmacher, Solomon Groisberg, Pat Hector, Natalie Heilbrunn, Devi Herlin, Deborah Carby, Alan Karlinski, Honey King, Hans Koch, Esfir Korodgaskaya, Nathan Lipson, Ernie Lutterman, Alan Mandel, Eric Mayer, Samuel Mednick, Shlomo Nachmani, Arya Leib Neuer, Diane Ozer, Samuel Pudovic, Howard Robins, Richard Hyman Ruskin, Sybil Schwenk, Harry Schulman, Jacob Soloveichik, Leona Steinman, Frank Tanner, Fagel Unterman, Max Vernon, William Wellington, Miriam Zabarski, Al Zuckerman, Saul Zugman. I invite you, if there are other names to share for Kaddish, those who are in the first year of mourning, to share them at this time. Stand together now as one congregation beside those who mourn and invite those who will to join in these words of Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chai echon uvyom echon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'izman kari v'imru, Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru,
Amen.
Amen. Yehi zichronam livracha, may their memories always be a blessing. Amen.
Amen.
And we'll stay standing as I want to invite Louis Polson to come help us lead Kiddush and Hamotzi. If you'd like to follow along with Louis, you can back on page 122.
ויחולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם, ויחל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה, וישפוט ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר מרא אלוהים לעשות סברי. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצה בנו, לשבת קודשו מאהבה וברצון הנחילנו, זכרן למעשה וראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה למקראין קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
Amen. Amen.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המוציא לחם מן הארץ. אמן.
Adon Olam, page 625. Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'Telem Kol Yatzir Nivra, Leit Nasa V'Chefzo Kol, Azai Melech, Shemo Nikra, Be'acharei Kichlot HaKol,
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Please join us in our social hall for an Oneg Shabbat.